yeah, it is. Sick. Okay. For those of you who are here, thank you. Beyond that, for those of you who are listening to the recording, I'm going to try and send this out and put it on our website, and maybe I'll be able to get Gerardo to send out the video to people as well, so it can be useful to you, despite not being able to be here. Especially too, it's not our normal time. Well, our normal time, but on a Wednesday. But yeah, so we're just going to do this. This is the workshop for applications for graduate studies and philosophy. This might have some information that's useful to non-philosophy majors as well. So really any majors are open. A lot of it's just going to be quite general information, but really geared towards philosophy majors. Me and Adam both, or Adam and I both, applied to graduate studies this last cycle, and both got into schools, myself into Ohio University's master program, a terminal master program. And then Adam, you can talk about wherever you went or are going.
Yeah, mine's also just a terminal master's at Colorado State. So.
Yeah, so we both applied this last year, so we figured we would work on this. I'm the president of the Philosophy Club, and Adam is the vice president. And then next Wednesday on the 19th, Dr. Nelson from UCR will be giving his portion of this, which will be the same time, 2 to 3 p.m. And he will be giving a reviewer perspective, whereas we're going to be sort of providing a more recent applicant perspective, especially with the big changes experienced by COVID. Some of those will still be persistent if you apply next year or something. So that will be hopefully useful. So I'll get going. All of this too is on a Google Drive. I will go ahead and post. Actually, Adam, do you think you could post the link to our Google Drive in the chat too?
Yeah, you'll figure that out.
Yeah. There should be a way. If you can't, I'll do it later. That should be fine too. But all of this is on our Google Drive, and we also have some information on there. I'll kind of go through once that's up. And then I put the link there too. So if anyone's watching this on a video, they might have to monotonously type in that link. So I couldn't get the link shorter, so sorry. Okay. We'll get right into it. First thing, before we even get into application materials and so on, we sort of wanted to focus on what to look for and where to decide sort of where to apply, the difference in programs and so on and so forth, because that's going to be the first hurdle, is deciding where you want to go. And then the second will be, of course, applying there and trying to get a position. So you can go either master's or PhD. And by that, I mean you can either go straight to a PhD, which is quite common, or you can do a terminal master's, such as Adam and myself are doing, and then that lasts 2 years, and then apply to PhD programs. So as far as PhD programs go, really who joins those programs immediately? You might be surprised, it's actually most people in America. Oftentimes programs will, in schools with their programs, only do PhD programs, such as UCR, for example, and they accept students who have their bachelor's or even those who have their master's. Difference there is that the master's degree is achieved within the PhD degree, so I'll talk about that. And the other people who, join, which is most students, it's just those who are planning on getting a PhD anyways. So really the benefits of the PhD program are, by going straight to a PhD program and not doing a terminal master's, you're going to go there eventually, assuming you are. So if your plan is to get a PhD eventually anyways, you're going to go there. The benefits being less applications for people such as Adam and I. We're doing the terminal masters first. And in 2 years, we will have to do another application cycle, which means more money, because these applications typically cost, more time of ours, more stress of having to go through another application cycle because it's not very fun. And just in general, you're doing 2 applications where you could do 1. So there is a lot of benefits to just going straight to a PhD program if you're able to. Especially people who go to PhD programs straight from their bachelor's. Often it's more accessible if you come from a university such as UCR or something of that sort, where it's a good-sized university with a very well-regarded faculty, compared to if you're coming from a very small school with a very small philosophy faculty. You almost have to do a terminal MA. In these PhD programs, master's degrees are achieved, as I had said. They're not typically formally awarded, but they are achieved after 2 years. So it's sort of a master's degree on track. So your first 2 years of the program, typically these programs are 5 to 7 years long, 5 being if you already have a master's degree. If you go straight from your bachelor's degree, let's say the program's 7 years, the first 2 years will be very consistent with a general MA program. And then oftentimes they'll still want you to do some sort of thesis or something of that sort, maybe a comprehensive test. And then you can sort of move on to this more PhD program, despite it being all consistently one program. Beyond that, this is the little dose of reality. It's not very fun to talk about, but I just took this quote off of a website. Reality is, just to give you a dose of reality, the attrition rate for any PhD school is very high. Anywhere from 1/3 to half of those who enroll in PhD universities will not end up graduating and finishing their dissertation. In fact, the figure is 40 to 50% of failing PhD students has been pretty stable over the last few decades. And as I have underlined and bolded here, that's even lower in the arts and humanities. So for PhD programs, they're very difficult. And most, I'd say the majority of people don't make it through. So PhD programs are very difficult. Not to say don't do it, but that's just a bit of reality there. So terminal MA programs now. So first, who joins these? Who goes to a terminal MA? Adam and me. Beyond us, yeah, it's typically students who only need an MA or who only desire to achieve a master's degree. Let's say you want to teach at a community college or, I don't know, do something else that might only require a master's. Then, of course, you only do a master's. There's no need to go to a PhD program. Students who didn't major in philosophy is another big one. You can join graduate school philosophy programs without having majored your undergraduate in philosophy. But typically it might be a little bit harder to go straight to a PhD program if all of your materials show that you're very good at, let's say, computer science, but there's really nothing to an instructor or to a faculty giving them any reason to believe you'd be great at philosophy. So sometimes it's easier to still get into a terminal MA program, start doing a little bit of philosophy, even pulling from that undergraduate experience. Maybe you're doing philosophy of mind or, you know, things on AI or whatever you're doing, right? You get a little bit more experience under your belt, and then you can go on to, in 2 years, apply to a PhD program. Another one, as I had mentioned before, students who are from smaller universities. By that, I mean universities with smaller philosophy departments. There's some schools where there's only 2 philosophy instructors, but they still offer bachelor degrees. Those people, you know, especially if it's just a not very well-regarded school, will almost have to do MA programs if they want to get into more of a upper echelon of PhD programs. And then lastly, students who, and this is honestly the category in which I fit in, which is students who don't feel quite ready to jump into a 7-year PhD commitment, because obviously that is a very large commitment of time and of stress and so on. And if you don't feel quite ready, then it might be nice to just go into a little 2-year commitment, and then you do another 5-year commitment after that. So there leads in sort of the benefits of MA programs. So one that I experienced quite apparently was the later application deadlines. When I originally was going to apply, I was going to go for PhD programs primarily because, again, that's the more common route. And all of their application deadlines were around December to January. I think I had earliest of December 1st, latest of like January 31st or something like that. So earlier, and that is for the year upcoming. So for example, for the 2021 fall semesters, they would be due in 2020 December or 2021 January. So usually, I don't know, 9 months or so in advance. Whereas MA, usually from my experience, was around February to March. Some even as far as May, such as like Cal State LA, they have more of a rolling application basis, which is interesting. So that helps for sure, is being able to have a little bit more time on all that material. And then the other benefits are expanding your CV, which we'll discuss sort of what that is exactly in a little bit. By expanding your CV, what I mean is getting more experience with reading and writing at that higher level philosophy. As I said, especially if you're not a current philosophy major, you get experience reading and writing philosophy. More time to get your work published into journals. So that's important. I would recommend even start submitting now into undergraduate journals while you can. Expand your CV. That's stuff that looks really good. Again, CV will go over. It's pretty much a resume, but slightly different. You get more time to submit your work to conferences, similar to journals, but there you get not so much published as you just get presentation experience. Oftentimes they want you to present your work in conferences. They'll give you like a 20-minute slot or something, and then time for questions and answers, and you can submit those and get that experience. You can do all these things in your undergraduate as well. It's just 2 more years to work on it. Graduate studies letters of recommendations. Again, we'll talk about letters of recommendations in just a little bit, what they are and what they entail. But from what I've heard, letters of recommendations from instructors or faculty that you worked with in graduate school are usually a little bit higher regarded than those you worked with in undergraduate, because they can more clearly attest to this student has done graduate programs for 2 years. They are very, apt to continue on into PhD programs. So they're usually well regarded a little bit more. And then lastly, you can get a better idea of sort of what you want from a PhD program. It's quite daunting to apply to these places, let alone then, sorry, my cats are being annoying. Apply to these places and to know where to apply, which again, we're trying to figure out here, but it will certainly help to have 2 years to better understand what you're looking for in a program. So as we were discussing, where are you going to apply? Once you decide whether you're applying to PhD programs exclusively or master's programs exclusively, perhaps a mix of the two. Now what? Adam, you can go on this part, right? This is you.
Yeah. So I'll be talking about a few websites and so forth, that you can kind of start your research on. So these top 2 right here, which have the fancy acronyms, the Philosophical Gourmet Report, which has nothing to do with fine dining as you'd expect. I think we might have a link to that later in the thing. Otherwise, we can get that to you. But it gives you kind of like a breakdown of, some of the top programs, down to some of the middle tier programs, let's say. But it just, wander around on their website and, kind of see what information they can give you. And then same thing with this APA, the American Philosophical Association. They've got lots of good information there. But then also I just threw a Google on there, partly as a joke, but partly because, just Google, stuff you're interested in. That's honestly how I found most of my programs. If you're interested in, like, let's say a particular field of philosophy or a particular school of philosophy, you can honestly just go Google, universities with blank, emphasis or whatever. And just the same way you would go about researching, just your undergrad universities, same thing. But then also feel free to ask your professors. They've all been to universities, they've applied. They read and keep up to date on all the philosophical literature out there, so they know what universities, what departments are doing what. So just ask around, get some ideas if you don't have a definite one in mind. And then kind of the same thing with this last bit. Depending on how much, like, of your own philosophical interests, lead you into reading your own stuff in your spare time. If you keep track of, like, oh, I really like what this professor's doing, or this philosopher, let's say, and they come from this department, maybe I'd be interested in checking that one out. Just keep track, as you're going through, you see that so-and-so comes from, San Francisco, whatever, then maybe check it out someday. Yeah. And then that kind of leads into this next bit is beyond just figuring out, where to begin looking, take a closer look at the departments that are there. Basically every, university will have a little bit of information, at least, about their faculty. If it looks like they're doing stuff you like, give it a closer look. The placements thing I have here. So what that refers to is when you graduate from whatever university it is you're looking into, it's how well, like maybe as a percentage or whatever fraction, they are successful in sending off their newly graduated students to either further programs. So especially like if it's a master's program, how well do those master's students, go get placed in further PhD programs, or how many of them go on, to get jobs or whatever. So obviously, if you have a university with really good placement, either into PhD programs or, professors, whatever, then they're doing something right. They a lot of them have programs set up where they'll help you, kind of search for something your final year or two of the program. And then also the financial support is pretty important, unless you're, like, I don't know, loaded. So it's college. There's more of it. So there's tuition, which can be hefty. But a good number of master's and PhD programs will cover your tuition if the university itself is well off, like they've got a lot of funding, or if you're doing like TA work, a lot of times they'll either waive it or significantly reduce it or what have you. And then if you're offering your services, I was going to say, if you're ATA, for the university, typically you'll get like some sort of stipend, to help pay for at least some of your meals. And then, they'll have other, benefits like healthcare sometimes, stuff like that. So whether or not a university offers good dental, hopefully that's not what's going to make or break, your decision. But it might, it might be important to some people. who knows? Um, Kevin had kind of mentioned this. Well, not kind of. He did mention the time to earn your degree. You know, some will get you in and out pretty quickly, especially master's programs, which are typically about 2 years. Most PhDs are somewhere around 7 plus or minus a year or two. I've seen a few that are like 5, which is kind of nice. But you know, just kind of depends. Other things to look at regarding the department at the university you're interested in. If it's a, you know, big sizable department versus, you know, one of those schools that has like 2 or 3 people, you know, that might be important to you one way or the other. And then I threw this on here, compatibility. If you're looking at a university because it's a big name like Harvard or whatever, let's say, that's cool, you know, go there if you want. But if you feel that they're doing all sorts of research that just doesn't interest you, you know, if you think you'd be bored out of your mind, you know, studying with these professors, you know, maybe look around a little bit elsewhere. And then this picture here, of course, I had to throw up, is the greatest philosophy department that ever existed. It was from Munich in like the 1920s or something. All phenomenologists. But we can go to the next slide. Here's another fun picture.
I like this one
okay.
more.
Yeah. Zac Efron reading the Nick McCann Ethics. What could be better? The students with whom you'll be studying could also be at least a bit of a factor into, you know, your decision process. If it's, there are a couple universities I applied to, for example, that only took 2 or 3 students into their program. So that's, you know, pretty small class size or cohort size, I think is the term they'll use. Other ones will have like a dozen or whatever. So, I mean, if you're going to base your decision, or at least factor this into your decision, I mean, do you want to have just a couple people that maybe you'll get to know really well, get to work with, or you know, are you super extroverted and you want to meet everyone who exists in the universe? Whatever. Compatibility, kind of the same thing. Although, I mean, the odds of you being able to determine whether you'd be philosophically compatible or otherwise with other students who are applying is, you know, chances are you won't have that information at your disposal. But let's say you're going from a master's to PhD program, you know, maybe you can see other stuff if you're kind of creepy and you want to see what the other guys have been writing. But whatever, you know, just kind of things to think about. But I did do this a couple of times. I would look at what their current grad students are doing or are interested in, kind of as an indication of what I would be doing, you know, if I get there. So same thing, like you can kind of do a bit of research on what the faculty is interested in. Most universities will have a web page for their grad students, you know, with a bit of information on them. So that's, you know, just another thing to consider.
Yeah, I can say too, looking at the cohort size in relation to the department size or the faculty size. So for me, when I ended up sort of towards the end of this application process, deciding between a few different schools' offers for me, one thing that helped me to choose between 2 schools that offered me admission and funding between Cal State LA and Ohio University was the cohort in relation to the faculty size. For example, Cal State LA, they offered around 15 to 16 people every year into their program, which is insanely, that's huge, right? And they had around 7 faculty. So you're looking at like 1 faculty per 2 students. Whereas Ohio, something that just made them, I think, better in my opinion in that regard, was that they offered around 2 to 4 students every single year. But they also had a faculty of around 7, 8 teachers. So there you're looking at 2 faculty per 1 student. So there, the relation there is different, as well as like Adam was saying, the cohort size is much smaller. So it's like, oh, do you want a larger cohort with more people that you could perhaps work with, meet, and, you know, grow with, or do you want a smaller group of just a few, select few people?
There's a baby crying in the background, so I don't know if you
I
can hear
can't hear
that,
it. You're
but
fine.
okay, cool. Okay, so the campus. I mean, this is kind of going to be the same stuff as, again, when you looked around for your campus for UCR. So I mean, the location, could be a factor. I looked at a few universities that were out of country, actually. It didn't work out for a number of reasons. I just, decided against it. But I mean, there are other good universities out there besides the United States of America, believe it or not. Not many. I mean, like two, but no. Seriously, there are plenty of good universities. So I mean, if you're able to figure all the details out of, just working around, uh, foreign universities, by all means, go ahead and look into that. Out of state, I mean, chances are, the university of your dreams could be out of state. So, and then, if it's in a city you like, I mean, all the better, right? Housing, apartments, same stuff. If you're going to have to live on campus, or find an apartment around there, this isn't so much like a make or break your university choice, but it's stuff to look at when you're doing all this. Facilities. I couldn't think of a better term for that. It sounds weird.
Bathrooms.
That yeah, not what I had in mind, but like, if it's this tiny little town and there's absolutely nothing to do, I mean, if that's the university of your dreams, okay, by all means. But if it's center of a big city or something, then that's cool. And then in any other stuff to look at. Yeah.
Yeah, because something else to take into consideration too, just to add to that, is like, um, for another example for me, Loyola Marymount was another one that accepted me into their program. But that's like West LA. That it's kind of in the more bougie part of LA. So it's very expensive to live around there. So yeah, it shouldn't be, hopefully, a make or break sort of thing. But finding a place to live over there would be significantly more expensive than finding a place to live, perhaps elsewhere. So that's, yeah. Hopefully that doesn't determine your choice, but unfortunately, money is obviously a huge concern for a lot of students. So that very well might. But
yeah. Okay, so how many applications should you be doing, making, submitting? Well, first of all, applications are going to cost you a bit of money. So, I mean, you can't apply to like 5,000 universities, unless you've got a lot of money. I think most of mine were like $50 to $75. Is that about what you had?
yeah, that was
Yeah.
same with me. At least for master's programs. PhD were a
Yeah.
little bit more
Yeah.
expensive. Like
Okay.
UC applications for PhDs are 140, which is pretty crazy. But that's the highest I've seen anywhere. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so it'll depend on where you're going, but that was the general price range for most of mine, which were all master's programs. I think I got my application fee waived by like one university. I don't even remember why. They just like emailed me like, "Hey, we waived it for you." So it might happen. Who knows? But some of them also have like forms you can fill out. If you're kind of hard for money, and they might consider getting you off the hook for that. Okay, so about 10 applications, again, give or take for MAs, is pretty common. Whereas if you're going for PhD programs, you might, up the scale a bit. I think that's probably about how many I did, 10 or so. I think I had 10 planned, and then I ended up not applying to the last two because I had already heard back from enough universities to make my choice. So whatever works for you. Now, if you're I'm sure all of you are bright individuals. But if you're applying only to Harvard, Yale, Columbia, you know, all these schools, um, I mean, nothing against you, but just statistically, you might not get into them, even if you shoot for that, you know, magical number 10. So, I mean, consider, you know, having like your high end schools, maybe middle tier, not necessarily low tier, but ones that like you're a little more confident you can get into, just in case you don't want to deal with rejections from every single one of them and then having to figure out what to do for a year or whatever, you know, until you can go to the next application process. Just something to consider.
Yeah.
And then this last point here, make use of spaced out application due dates. I don't know why I couldn't think of the word for this. Like when you have them like tiered, there's a particular word that's on the tip of my tongue, but I can't think of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, I had like 3 or 4 universities whose application due dates were in like January or late January, 3 or 4 in February, and then, you know, maybe like the last 2 in March or whatever. If you hear back from those early schools early enough, you might not even have to spend the money or time, you know, with those last schools. If the one of those last few schools isn't the university of your dreams, then, you know, maybe wait. But for me, those were the lower end schools that I was pretty confident I could get into, kind of as like a backup in case I didn't get to one of these others. So, you know, just an idea.
Yeah, I can say too, just to further add, even like I've talked to PhD students at UCR, and let's say one of them, they left a very good MA program, like top 5 MA programs in America. And they applied, for example, for them to 22 PhD programs, and they only got into one, and it was UCR. And they came from one of, again, top 5 schools in America. So like Adam was saying, statistically, you can be great, but there's a lot that goes into it. Sometimes there's just a lot of great people applying to these programs, especially if they're very well regarded names. And just statistically, like 90% of people get rejections, which is also sort of rough to deal with, right? It sucks to be rejected a bunch. So curb your rejections down by trying to be as most realistic as possible. Not saying that you're not great, but yeah. So now, sort of going into, and we'll come back to this stuff if we need to. We'll kind of have a questions area at the end too, and just talk about random stuff. But let's say now you're at the point where you've decided, okay, I'm going to apply to a mix of PhD and MA programs. And then sort of maybe MA programs like a backup, some PhD is you know, what you really would like. You've decided what schools generally you'd like to apply to, how many applications, and so on. Now it's just about the necessary materials needed to apply. Most schools sometimes they vary on what they require for their applications, but generally most schools are pretty consistent. So the first thing, as I had said before, the CV or curriculum vitae, is that how you pronounce it, Adam? I don't know.
Vitae, but sure.
Vitae, whatever. That thing, the CV, it's sort of like a resume, but different. So I've kind of created this chart on the right. I don't know what these are called. Venn diagrams? They're Venn diagrams. It's been a while. Sort of trying to give the difference between a resume and a CV. So for example, a resume, those are typically shorter, like maybe a page or 2 max. They're less detail, and they typically focus upon your applying to jobs and your work experience and skills. Whereas the CV on the other side, it's longer in length, or it can be, it depends. But it's typically longer in length, a bit more detailed, and it focuses less on your work experience and more so on your academic achievements and experience. Both of them are intended to show just that you're eligible for the position that you're applying for. And both of them include much of the same information as well. So generally the information that a CV would include, of course, you have your name and contact information. Foremost is usually, these aren't necessarily in order, but maybe. But foremost is typically education might be on the top, right? Similar to how a resume might have work experience. Education will be on the top. You'll say, okay, this is where I got my bachelor's from. This is where I got my associate's from, whatever. You could do some leadership experience. Of course, anything, have a little caveat there, relevant leadership experience, relevant work. So that means if you worked at, for me, during most of my undergraduate, I worked at GameStop. That's not really relevant to whether I'll be a successful philosophy student, so don't put that. But if you worked at, let's say, a university doing something that you think might be relevant, then just throw it in there. Especially undergraduate curriculum vitaes end up usually being a bit shorter, and students really have to look for stuff to put in there. So if you have relevant work experience, then by all means. Beyond that, awards and achievements. So if you've gotten specific grants, scholarships, if you've been on honors lists, dean lists, etc., put those in there as well. Publishments, this one is much less common for undergraduates, but if you do have any, that looks quite good. So if you've submitted to journals and so on, as I said before, it's useful to start submitting because that looks good on a CV publishing. Similarly, talks or presentations, panels you've given, so on. Those could be specifically for philosophy or for other disciplines if you're minoring in something, or perhaps just, say for me, I have done a lot of panels for transfer students. This just a little bit ago, I was in a panel for Highlanders Day. I don't know if you guys remember going to that. None of these, to answer to, publishments, talks, and presentations are not the most important thing. Again, you guys are undergraduates, so it's not like they're expecting you to have this massive repertoire of all of these things. This is just stuff, if you have it, it looks good. Most people don't expect this from undergraduates because you're an undergraduate. You're supposed to be focusing on your coursework. So going into that, relevant coursework, again, sometimes people might want to pad out their CV a little bit and do relevant coursework, such as, let's say, if you're applying to programs that focus on environmental ethics, and in your statement of purpose, which we'll go over later, you say, this is what I want to do. I want to focus on research and environmental ethics. Then it might be useful in your CV to say, oh, I took an environmental ethics class and I wrote this paper on the efficacy of eating meat or something like that. I don't know. So that might be useful information to add there. Beyond that, your references, sometimes they'll ask for references similar to a resume. Don't put your mom or something like that. I put all the same people who wrote me my letters. I don't know if that was normal or not, but I did. So no one said anything, so I'll assume that was fine. Just to put the exact same people who wrote my letters of recommendation, which we'll go over. And then the last thing too, just what's the importance of a CV? A CV typically, from what I've heard, and we can talk to Dr. Nelson about this next Wednesday, but from what I've heard, a CV is not typically like a make or break thing for your application. They'll look at it, the faculty, and they'll reference it and so on, but it's usually not. If you have a lackluster CV, someone will be like, wow, this is a great student. Look at this writing sample, this statement of purpose. These letters are incredible, but their CV is just so bad, we can't do anything for them. It's typically not like that. So a bad CV, or maybe not bad isn't the right word, but like I said, a lackluster, a very small CV with very little, awards, achievements, no publishments, no presentations. Again, that's not a bad CV for an undergraduate. It's just a smaller CV. That will not impede your ability to get in schools, but a good CV might help you out a bit. If you have a lot of publishments, for some reason, you've just been submitting to journals and getting into all of them, and you've done presentations, you've had a lot of leadership experience with whatever you're doing, that can help. So that's typically, I think, the importance is it's not going to stop you from getting into school, but it could give you a little leg up on someone else that you're in quite close competition with.
Just about the CV thing, and then also this next slide. These are what we have in that Google Drive that I shared, that I posted in the chat, by the way.
Yes.
So we have an example of Kevin's and my own, hopefully with our addresses removed. Otherwise, please don't creep on us.
I think I got my address removed.
But I mean, you can also find tons of examples online, just like a resume. A CV is going to be for academics, so typically it's pretty plain. You don't need to do all these fancy text boxes and pop outs and stuff that people do on resumes. It's just straight to the point.
Yeah, so in that Google Doc, thank you for adding that, because I forgot about that. In that Google Doc, we have both copies of my CV and Adam's CV as of the time of our applying, as well as both of our statement of purposes, and both of our writing samples. So we didn't post like our transcripts or anything, but you guys can get those to get an idea of sort of what we've done. That's by no means a pinnacle of writing samples or statement of purposes or CVs. But you can at least get an example of a philosophy specific one, right? Because if you Google CV, you can definitely find templates, but sometimes it's very different, especially in the humanities, something like philosophy. A lot of people, and there'll be a lot of sciences ones, that have like research experience and so on, but we don't have that. So hopefully you can get something out of our specific philosophy ones, and sort of what those look like. As well as I did look at Adam's, and ours are quite different in both our statement of purpose, our CV, and our writing samples, which I really was happy about, because that shows to me that there's no specific, way to do it. Right? You can do it a lot of different ways, and still have a successful application. Next thing is the statement of purpose. So we went over CV, another thing that they'll typically ask for. Not actually all of them ask for a CV, in my experience. I only had like 3 of mine out of 10 ask for a CV. I added them all. They usually have something in the application portal saying like any materials you want to add, you can. But everyone asks for a statement of purpose. There are slight differences between academic statements, personal statements, and statement of purpose. So pay attention sort of to what they ask for. What it is essentially is a statement of purpose can, for the most part, be split up into 2 smaller bits, which is an academic statement and a personal statement. Statement of purpose, you're just talking about your academics and you as a person. So on the Venn diagram on the right, academic statement, they typically focus on, or this section, I guess you could say, focuses on your academics, of course, your relevant coursework, as well as your academic goals, what you want to do if you want to be a professor, or even maybe short-term goals, Then personal statement focuses on you, discuss sort of your journey, where you got to the place you are, and perhaps your life goals. Not all of them, like sort of slightly relevant life goals. The balancing act of a statement of purpose can be difficult. And by balancing act, I mean balancing between having it like a biography about you that, frankly, I'm sorry, but not a lot of people care about, or about your biography. I mean, not about you, you're amazing. Or on the other side, having it this really monotonous thing that's just talking about how great and smart you are, or how smart you are, which also usually no one cares. So it's also a balancing act between uh, making yourself look good, but not making yourself look arrogant, right? Because you're trying to talk yourself up and explain to people why you can succeed, without, sounding super arrogant and cocky, right? So going over to the bullet points, again, some of the schools I looked into asked for separate academic statements and personal statements. Most of them just asked for a statement of purpose, which can kind of ostensibly be the collection of the two of those things. So what to include, you might notice some of this information is repeated from your CV, or vice versa, whatever you think. Sometimes there's multiple, avenues in which they can get information about you. So what to include, explanations is a pretty unique thing that you should include, if applicable, in your statement of purpose. By explanations, I mean, if you have a low GPA, address it. Don't necessarily think it will fall under the radar. I can't really say what a low GPA is. It depends on the program that you're applying to. But let's say if they say when you're on their website, they typically look for a 3.0 GPA and you're at a 2.2, don't think that it will fly under their radar. Explain why you're at a 2.2. Also, explain extended leave of absences if you have any. If you got your associate's 6 years ago and then now you got your bachelor's degree, explain that, bring it up and say, I took a leave of absence because I had a kid and we had to focus on parenting or something like that. Or similarly, extended time to degree. If you didn't have a leave of absence, but you took one class a quarter or something along those lines, and it took you 7 years to get your bachelor's degree, typically explain that. Otherwise, they might look at these things as something bad. Perhaps an extended leave of absence, they might think, you were just too exhausted after your associates that you needed this long leave of absence, or perhaps you can only handle one class at a time, so that's why it took you 7 years to get your bachelor's or something. But you kind of address these things and say, look, I work full time and I have to support my family, so I only could take one class a quarter or something along those lines. So explanations, if applicable to you, are a good thing to bring up and to talk about. Beyond that, why you're interested in philosophy, what sparked this interest. So you could be like a total nerd and you're like, I've been in philosophy since I was like 6 years old, like Adam, right? Like I picked up a book and I started reading Greek or something. Or you could just be like, I don't know, dude, like for me, for example, I'm also a total nerd, but I went to community college with the intent to get a degree on childhood education. I wanted to teach elementary school like my wife does. And I just straight changed my mind. And so in college, I decided that I liked philosophy. I didn't even know what philosophy was before then. So sort of what sparked your interest, briefly, and what you've done to be successful. Again, this is sort of a balancing act between being really arrogant and not, telling people what you've done to be successful, and what you'll continue to do, perhaps what you've learned. If you have a low GPA, you can say, look, here's what I have learned from that. If you look at my transcripts, all of my upper division philosophy courses are all straight A's, 4.0. But where my GPA struggles is in my, my general education courses, or perhaps my language courses. I'm just really bad at that. But what I've learned is how to overcome these obstacles, or whatever it is, right? And generally what you're trying to do is show these people that you are one of those, as I showed at the beginning, like 50%, let's say, fail PhD programs. You're trying to show them that you're one of the 50% who can succeed by trying to your whole application is doing that, but you're trying to put it into words saying, this is what I've done to be successful. This is what I plan to continue to do. And these are my goals. and I want to achieve them. I will persevere through this program to achieve those goals of whatever it is, right? And then the last thing too, or two more things. One, should it be personalized? Sometimes. If you have a lot of time on your hands, by all means, personalize your statement of purposes to each particular school you're applying to. If you're applying to 10 schools, I don't think anyone does, expect you to have 10 personalized statement of purposes to their specific program. Here's my goals. It's to go to Ohio University because I love Ohio, or something like that, right? They don't expect it like a love letter to the university. But if you have, let's say, one or two universities that you really are excited for, that's your dream school, then perhaps take a little bit of extra time to personalize some statement of purposes to those specific schools. And why, take these things like, what have you done to be successful? Or sorry, what will you do to be successful? Tailor it to their program. Here's why I think I'll be successful in your program because your program is set up in this way, or something along those lines. And then last thing too is this very thing at the bottom left was very important to me personally. I used a writing tutor. I used this one that I have here at UCR, Jennifer. She was really awesome. She's a graduate student, and she specifically does meetings where you can talk to her about making a statement of purpose. I had 2 different meetings with her, and that was very valuable information to get a little bit of help on writing those as well. And then I think that's the last thing for me, and then I'll go back to Adam. Transcripts, these ones aren't very, they're pretty self-explanatory. Official or unofficial, most of the time places will ask for unofficial transcripts. You can get those on online typically and get them sent in like PDF versions or something to these schools. Until you're admitted and you accept the admission and you say, I'm going to, Brandeis or something like that, then they'll say, okay, we need your official transcripts now. And then again, you go through the school and you can send those out. How important are transcripts? I would say it's kind of similar to a CV in that sometimes if you really have a fantastic writing sample, which we'll go over, but your grades aren't the best, I mean, you've shown that you can write very well, and that's a very integral part of, philosophy. But there is still an importance there, that they look into it. It really depends. So with your GPA, if you have a 4.0, that's awesome. If you have a 3.0, that's, I think, fine. If you have less than that, it depends heavily on the school, but it could be, a detrimental factor, especially if you don't address it very well in your statement of purpose. And then honors, I've never really done honors or anything like that. But I'd imagine that will just add further. That's just one more thing on your transcripts that people will see and perhaps get you a leg up on someone who's quite close to you. If, let's say Adam and I are battling for a spot in Colorado State University, Adam won. And I also applied to that school. I didn't get in. So screw you, Adam. But Adam won. Let's say, if we're close candidates and they're like, okay, who should we choose between these two? And any little things help. If Adam had an honors thing on there, it very well could have just given him that leg up. They're like, okay, this is the tiebreaker. It almost seems arbitrary, but it's the tiebreaker. Or this person had a slightly better CV. There's the tiebreaker, whatever it is. So all of these things can definitely help. And they're all very important for those reasons, right?
I think the tiebreaker in our case was my groundbreaking essay on Aristotle.
I'm sure it was.
Yeah. No. Okay. So the GRE, you'll probably have to do this rather than not.
I think so. I think they're doing these next.
Yeah. I know some schools are starting to minimize the importance of it or care less, whether you've done it or how well you did it. It's just part of the whole movement away from standardized tests and stuff that's getting popular these days. But I think all except one schools, asked if you have it, submit it. But because of COVID stuff this last year, they're like, well, we understand, you might have had some issues. So if you don't have it, that's okay. It won't completely hurt you. But if you can do it, do it.
What is the GRE?
Yeah, the GRE. So there's a general test, and then there's also subject tests. If you're going into philosophy, you'll be doing the general, unless within the next year they make a philosophy subject GRE, which probably won't happen. But the subjects are normally for like STEM stuff, so the general is the one you're going to go with. Like most of these, kind of upper level classes, or not classes, tests, they're going to kind of test you across the spectrum of different skills. Verbal, which has to do with, like reading comprehension and stuff. Quantitative, there is a bit of math. Even if you're doing philosophy, they'll want you to know how to add and stuff. And I mean, just general life advice, you should know how to add. And then analytical is like the essay that you write. Just demonstrate that you can string words together in a sentence. So top scores for verbal and quantitative, it's out of like 170. And then your essay, I guess, is graded out of 6. I thought it was graded out of 5. I thought I read that somewhere, but maybe that was an old version or something.
Maybe, I'm not sure. It was Whatever. One of the two.
I got a 7 anyway, so I who knows. But no. So if you're doing philosophy, right, for your grad program, whether master's or PhD, the math portion is not going to be as important. But again, if you can't do basic fractions, I mean, it could be indicative of certain problems, or maybe you're just bad at math. Who knows? If you blow it out of the park with your verbal and analytic, that could get you in anyway. So you're able to retest. I think you can do it like 5 times a year or something, but I don't know if anyone would ever want to do that. But a good number of people, 1 in 4 apparently, do retest. As far as I can tell, though, it's not the case where like you take 3 tests, you study math for 1, you study vocab for another, and then you practice essays for another, and then you add the highest scores. I think it's just they go off your last one.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to do all of it. Yeah. Speaking of which, I didn't put this on the slide actually, but it just occurred to me now. For that verbal portion, it's a lot of vocabulary, like high level vocabulary that you'll see a lot in like academic texts and stuff. But if you get one of those like study books that they have or whatever, or they sell like GRE vocab flashcards, if you want to, get ahead of the curve, start practicing those words that you might not know, you'll want to do that basically. It's going to cost you a bit, about $205. And I'm not sure if they have waivers or anything like that. I don't remember seeing anything. But I mean, if you have to do the GRE, you have to do it. So fine, $205, I guess. Go without coffee for a month or something. Fun fact, philosophy and physics majors tend to do the best on the GRE. Philosophy specifically in the verbal and analytic sections, so the word stuff, and then physics majors tend to do best on number stuff. So that sounds like it would help you, but that just means that everyone else who's applying for a philosophy program is also going to be doing really well in these. So, you'll just cross your fingers and hope for the best, I guess. There's a couple other tests that you might encounter. There's the TOEFL, something of English as a foreign language. I think it's just test of English as a foreign language or something. The TOEFL or TOEFL in German, not really, that's a joke. And then there's also like this IELTS or something, which is the exact same, except it's like for the UK or Australia or something weird like that. But basically it's if you're a foreigner and you need to prove that you have adequate English skills to hack it in an American university. Vice versa, if you're going for a foreign university, if it's like, let's say in Germany or whatever, you might have to take a similar but differently titled test for to get into those programs. A lot of European universities, though, will have an English like section of their department, though. So a lot of times this won't matter. but sometimes it does. So that test costs what was it, $185 or so. I think it actually costs more, like depending on the country you're in. But I assume this might not apply to all of you. So if it does, I mean, there are resources out there to look at. But I think that's good. So letters of rec. These are relatively important. I think all the schools I applied to asked for 3.
Same with me.
I think some might ask for 4, but 3 is a pretty common number. So you're going to go to your professors, beg them to write you some letters saying that you can make it in a university or in a grad program. Of course, ask early. Don't wait till like 2 days before the thing's due to ask, because while all of mine were very quick about it, they got it in like a day or 2 after I asked it. It might not be the case with the professor you asked, so
I can
they might
say
not appreciate that.
I had Luca Ferrero write one of mine,
Uh-huh.
and he turned it in like a half hour before the deadline. So
That's
yeah,
awesome.
asking ahead of time.
Yeah, ask early. What if it's a year out? Well,
You can give them a heads up.
You can ask them to write it for you, and then just remind them like a couple weeks ahead to submit it. I guess.
Yeah, like usually like 3-4 weeks ahead or something. But yeah, you can always give them a heads up. Usually when you're fresh in their mind too, like, hey, I just got an A in your class. It's going to be a while, but can you eventually write me a letter of rec or something like that? So
yeah. If the professors that wrote all my letters, I had taken multiple classes with, so I knew them, they knew me pretty well. If for whatever reason that isn't the case, just make sure that you know a professor. I mean, it's a little tougher now with all this online stuff, but when you guys go back to campus, go into office hours, make sure they know who you are, make sure they know what kind of stuff you're writing, doing, reading, studying, whatever. It'll give them more material, to flesh out your letter with. If you're transferring departments, which is this next point, like I, for example, applied to a couple of philosophy programs, but I also applied to some for classics. Insofar as you're able, have people of the department to which you're applying, philosophy or classics or physics or whatever, have people from your current university write those letters, because it's going to mean more, for whatever Spanish studies, to have your Spanish professor do it rather than your philosophy professor. Hopefully that's more or less obvious, but just make sure you keep track of that as much as you're able to do. Disclosure. So this is just kind of something weird, but something good to know. Because of legal stuff, you're allowed to have access to the letters of recommendation that your professors write for you. But all the professors that I've spoken to say don't do that, because then it looks like you're checking your professor's work to make sure that they wrote well about you. And then if the university sees, and they will see, that you wanted access to that letter, it might not, count against you. It might not break your opportunity completely, but I mean, it doesn't look nice. So if you can spare yourself, just say, I don't care, I don't need to read this thing or whatever. I accidentally clicked the wrong one on one of them. So Professor Wood came back to me with this huge email. He's like, yeah, you don't want to do this. So I was like, oh, sorry. I literally pressed the wrong thing. But yeah, so watch what you're doing. In general, when you're doing applications, make sure you click the right buttons. Just
yeah. I never. Yeah, it's typical that you never get to see the letters of recommendation written about you. You just kind of have to assume that they're good, hopefully.
Yeah.
Another quick thing I wanted to address too, because these are, I think, 2 common questions. Well, one, technically we said we were going to end at 3. We're just going to keep going. If you guys have to leave, by all means. This video will be up on our website. But anyways, another thing that are 2 common questions, and we're almost done. Can I get ones from my transfer if you transferred somewhere? from my community college, and another one, can I get letters from people outside of my major? So one, you can get letters of recommendation from community college professors, but it probably won't look as good just because the last time they saw you was 2 years ago versus the last time these other instructors for more upper division philosophy courses saw you was, recently. And their upper division philosophy courses versus this guy or girl is writing you because you were great in Phil 101 or something, an intro to philosophy, and it's different. Uh, and then two, the second thing, people outside of your major, Adam sort of mentioned this, is fine, as long as it can sort of relate to what you want to study. So for me, I got two from philosophy, two letters from philosophy, and one from the religious studies department, because my minor is in religious studies and I like to do philosophy of religion. So it sort of applies. But if I got one from philosophy and two from anthropology, and I want to do philosophy of mind, those ones from anthropology are going to be weird because they can't really attest to my ability to adequately handle grad school in philosophy. They could say, well, I think this person could do grad school great for anthropology, but they can't really attest to my philosophy prowess. So you can do it just within reason, sort of.
Yep. Okay, so interviews. I only had one school that had an interview set up. So I don't know how applicable this will be
Yeah, I
for
didn't have
anyone
any.
else. Okay, yeah, it's not as common. But if it happens, then I mean they'll ask. Well, I only had the one, like I said, so I don't know what other ones will do. But all the questions were relevant, not so much like a job interview, they'll ask you about stuff like that. I mean, obviously it's more academic stuff. So they asked like so this was to a classics program, as I had mentioned. So they asked like what kind of stuff I had read and which authors I was more interested in, what kind of stuff I wanted to focus on, stuff like that. So I mean, pretty general questions. If you are at all actually ready for grad school, you should be able to answer all these questions. I mean, these should be, reasons why you're going into the grad program, because you are interested in doing these sort of things. And then, kind of generic interview advice insert here, look nice, shave if you need to, or don't, whatever, if that's your thing. Whatever. I did mine over Zoom, so it was pretty laid back. But if you're going for like Harvard or something, then it might be in person. And then, maybe don't show up with like your ripped jeans or something. But
In a tank top.
I mean, it's your call, whatever. Yeah. Okay. So writing
Oh yeah,
sample.
we can kind of both talk about this. I can start because I did most of the slide itself. I in structuring this thing, and this will be our last slide, really. In structuring this, I saved this for last because it's the most important. And I can pretty firmly say it's not that I think it's the most important. For philosophy, it's the most important thing in your materials. The writing sample. This is typically just a philosophical writing. Length differs for MA programs, maybe around 15 pages. I think I looked at Adam's. I think yours was around the exact same as mine. I think it was like 13-ish or something. For PhD, they usually ask for a bit more, maybe around 20 pages or so. These aren't firm numbers. They usually give you like I don't know, general like 2 to 3 page plus or minus. It really depends on how dense the information is and how well you cover whatever you're writing about. I'll come back to the bullet points in a sec. I wanted to go over this thing that I have on the right, the tips for submitting a writing sample. I didn't make this. I actually crossed one thing out. So I'll go over that. First, choosing your writing sample. This sort of goes hand in hand with the thing I crossed out that says start from scratch. Don't do that. In my experience, everyone told me not to do that. Typically, at some point in your undergraduate experience, you will likely have to present or have a paper for the final that's like 10 pages. That's pretty common at UCR for your undergraduate. Like, hey, our final paper is 10 pages-ish. Take one of those that you got an A on. A faculty's already read it and reviewed it. You've already possibly gone through drafts and so on. Choose that one that you like and polish it out more and try and maybe expand on areas and get a professor, probably one of the ones who's writing your letters for you or one of your letters, maybe even multiple professors, and get them to help you. So yeah, if you don't have a 15 to 20 page paper, that's pretty normal. Like I said, typically at some point in your undergraduate, you'll probably do like a 10-page paper. Then what I would do, if you don't know, and this is what happened to me, I had a 10-page paper. I didn't know what else to write. And I got an A on it for a class, but I was like, okay, what else do I write? So I went to one of my letter writers, Dr. Fisher, and I said, where should I expand on this? I want to use this as a writing sample. Can you read it again with better scrutiny and tell me where I can expand on this to get this page count up? And he did, right? Then after I added a bunch of stuff, he actually read it a second time, which was really nice. Approach these things similar to a letter of recommendation if you're asking for faculty help, very politely, because they don't have to do this. And they probably don't really desire to sit down and read your paper and, you know, help you beyond just wanting to help you because, you know, they know who you are as a student. But it's probably not enjoyable to them, is what I mean to say. So, and you just kind of end up making this, you know, larger paper. Again, Adam and I think we're both around like 13 pages. So those two, right? So choose a writing sample. Don't start from scratch. Then match the sample with the job, or in this specific case, if you can, if you have multiple 15-page papers lying around, by all means, similar to the statement of purpose, tailor them to the specific program. I didn't, and I think it was still fine. I did a single writing sample. It was 13 pages, and I submitted the same one to every single program. But if I'm applying to, let's say for Adam's case, if he was applying to some classics program, he might have wanted to submit a classics one and maybe a philosophy one. Not that he has to, but he can, right? And then the last thing was, or a few things, follow their directions. Obviously, that's pretty obvious. Of if they say around 15 pages, sometimes they give a word minimum and a word limit. Follow it. It just automatically doesn't look good if you're outside of those things. And then this one, I didn't do an interview, and I don't think interviews are in person often, but it says bring it to an interview. If you do end up doing an interview, they might ask questions about your writing sample. So just sort of be prepared for that. And perhaps if you need to have it ready at the in person. All of our things we did with COVID, not in person, so that doesn't really apply, but it might. So then going back to the bullet points, content, it's best to focus on what you enjoy. So secondly, match your interests in your CV and your statement of purpose. By that I mean, if I am going to graduate school and I put in my CV and my statement of purpose, I love Nietzsche and I want to focus on Nietzsche, I want to write on Nietzsche and so on, and I write I turn in my writing sample and it's on, you know, philosophy of language, pragmatics, then someone might think, well, if I'm applying to a program where I'm trying to get with, work with an instructor who does Nietzsche and so on, it might be very weird to have this pragmatic paper. How do I know that you know anything about Nietzsche? So typically it's best to focus one on what you enjoy, and that will typically match your interests that are stated in the CV. Again, if you have multiple writing samples, that's great. I don't think anyone expects you to because you're an undergraduate. But if you have multiple writing samples, and in this program you talk about how much you love working, on Nietzsche studies, and then on this other program, you tailor it and you say, I really like Plato or something, then you can put in different writing samples if you have that available to you. And then don't choose something boring. This is a bit of a tough one, but there were a few writing sample, when I had multiple 10-page papers that I was thinking about, like which one am I going to expand on for a writing sample, there were a few of them that I ultimately looked at the content of the paper and I was like, this sounds boring as hell. It's like I wrote it for a class and it's like, talking about, something really generic about, Kantian ethics or something. And it was just really, it just sounded boring. And it was very elementary. It was like a very broad strokes, overview of deontology or something like that. Try not to choose that because a professor might very well look at that and be like, dude, I've read papers like this so many times and I just do not desire to read this. Something that I've heard from professors, a lot of the time these schools have a lot of applications, sometimes hundreds. And as sad as it is, even though you're paying them to read your application because you're paying for an application, they might not read it. If they look and it has a really boring title or a really boring abstract or something, they might just automatically throw it out, which is really sucky. But I have heard from professors that have blatantly said, yeah, we take around like 30% of them and look at the abstracts or whatever, and we just don't have a desire to read that. We just toss it. So try and choose something interesting, if at all possible. And then lastly, importance. I already talked about that. This is the most important thing for the application. Adam, do you have anything more that I didn't address?
Not too much. I did start from scratch. But yeah. I was going to say, don't do that if you're able to. Now, the reason I had to was I had to write something for classics, the classics departments. And I had never written anything for those because just, the particular classes I took never required anything like that. But I was kind of smart about this. I made it the philosophy of ancient, Greece and Rome. It was about Aristotle. So I was able to submit the exact same essay or writing sample for both the classics departments I was applying to, as well as philosophy. So, I mean, if you can pull that off, then like you're a genius like me. But no, so it is possible. It's just mind numbing. So yeah, if you're able not to, then don't do it. I also just like, for whatever reason, never had a paper over like 8 pages. And the ones that I did do during my undergrad for philosophy, just weren't, they were in the boring category. I just didn't feel like expanding them. I had all sorts of ideas going about this particular topic that I wrote on. So I was able to whip it out pretty quickly, actually. But in general, don't do that. I think there might have been something else I thought of, but no, I think that's good.
For sure. Overall, I like to, there's been questions sort of throughout. If you guys have questions, what I'll do is just, as I said, since we're recording this, I'm going to try and put this online and so on. If you guys do have questions, whether in person, you can put them in the chat, or online, I can always say you can email me at any time. I'll offer up my own email. It's kbeth or kbetho002002 at ucr.edu. I don't think I put that in text anywhere, but I'll at least offer that up. You can always email me, and if you have a question for Adam, I'm sure you can email him too. Beyond that, that's the end of this one. We went over a little bit, so thank you guys. But part 2 probably won't go over because we're sort of on Dr. Nelson's time clock there. But that one is next Wednesday, same time, May 19th. Dr. Nelson is the Director of Graduate Studies at UCR, and he's the one who takes the head position of looking over applications. Again, as I said at the very beginning, UCR only has a PhD program, so they don't have a terminal master's, but they do accept bachelor degree students or those with their master degrees as well. So he'll give a better perspective on what they look for on their side, what makes a good application, and so on. You guys can always come to that. I'll try and send out an email, so hopefully there'll be more people too, so Dr. Nelson isn't just talking to us. And I'll see if we can get that too. So in general, that is the meeting. I'm going to go ahead and